Think about travel for a minute. Airports have bars, beaches have rum drinks, cities have pub crawls, wine country, brewery tours, the whole cocktail culture. It's everywhere. So, what happens when you love to travel, but you don't drink? Do you miss out on something? Or, or do you see the world differently? Today's guest has spent years exploring that question.
If you've stepped away from drinking or the things that used to numb you, you know it changes your life. But it changes the people watching you too. You become quiet proof that something better is possible. On Sober Life Rocks, we talk with people who realize that their choice wasn't just personal, it was a platform, a chance to be a leader, to shorten somebody else's learning curve, to do something that really mattered. If you felt that pull, you're in the right place. Subscribe and stay with us.
Welcome, and I'm so happy to have you here today. Today's guest is Teresa Bergen, a Portland-based travel writer who focuses on outdoor, eco, vegan, and sober travel. She's also the author of the Sober Travel Handbook, and she's on a mission to normalize non-drinking while exploring the world. Teresa, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me on. I really admire the work you do, and I'm honored to get to be on your podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, we met at Amplify, and it was just a joy to get to meet you in person and now to get to know you better. So, I was thinking about our call today, and I kind of just want to start with the idea that travel culture seems incredibly tied to drinking. As I said in the intro, airports, cruises, resorts, wine tours. Why do you think alcohol is so embedded in the way that we experience travel?
It's really embedded in our culture in general, but we just see it in a different way when we travel. And for a lot of people, they kind of buy into this idea that relaxing and unwinding requires drinking. And when people go to travel, if they're going on vacation, then they often think that that goes hand in hand. Like, I'm supposed to be here to relax, thus I need a drink. And then if you think of like business travel, that has a different way, that has a different travel meaning too, where people feel like I have to be I have to be one of the group. Everyone's at the bar. I'm going to lose out on my business if I don't fit in by drinking. So on the one hand, the vacation, you have the kind of a feeling like it's supposed to be for fun, and then the business, you might have the feeling more driven by fear to drink because you don't want to miss out and be the one that loses business because you're not joining in the fun. I'll say in quotes.
Absolutely. Now, you traveled before you stopped drinking, is that correct?
Oh, some, but I got sober really, really young, Margie. I was 20 years old. So I've been sober most of my life. So I did travel drunk some, but I was a very young person then, so it would have been a different experience anyway. It was like very budgeted. It sometimes, I can remember one trip included hitchhiking and sleeping in a box. I mean, that's about as budget as you get.
Someday I'd love to hear more about that story. Okay, so as you then got into life, not drinking, and this was back in the 80s, am I correct?
Yeah, it would have been 1988.
Wow. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. I was very lucky.
What was life like back then as you tried to navigate travel without drinking?
Well, it's not really the most relevant question for me because I was not legal age yet. So it wasn't really that. In a way, it wasn't, I didn't have the adult expectation that I would drink. So that
fast forward into your 20s, let's say.
That wasn't really such a problem at the very beginning. But then in my 20s, I wasn't really going on the kind of trips that people pressure you to drink so much in my 20s because I was pretty broke at the time, and I wasn't going to, the kind of like resort places that people think of a lot of drinking. I think I was going more on, like visiting family or friends who already knew I was sober, going on road trips and stuff like that. So it wasn't that difficult for me, really.
I remember, again, I was thinking about all this when we were getting ready for our podcast. So my job was I ran the education department for a medical diagnostic company. And as such, I had to go to conferences all over, all the time. And I had gotten sober at the treatment center and then had about a 6 week period of time when I got back home to sort of ease back into my job and get going again. And of course, I didn't tell anybody any of this. So it was my first business trip. And I was really nervous about it. I don't even remember the flight there, but I remember I had to take a bunch of speakers out to a dinner afterwards. And the first thing that happens as the host is that they hand you the wine book. And this is, Teresa, a directory of all of my best friends. And in the moment, I looked at this and I thought, oh God. And I literally, almost out of panic, said, I'm just not that familiar with all of this. Can somebody else pick something?
Mm.
And trying to find the reasons why I wasn't going to partake and all of those just awkward moments. But I got through it. For the rest of the conference, I would go to some of the after event happy hours and leave early.
Mm-hmm.
But by the end of it, 3 or 4 day conference, I was exhausted, absolutely exhausted from exerting all this effort to navigate this space. And I remember climbing on the airplane and the doors shut and we climb to altitude and I see the cart starting to come down the aisle. And I thought to myself, I'm going to drink. I'm in this tube where I can't get out. I'm in a window seat. I can't get out. Please, God, if the person next to me doesn't drink, I'll be okay. But if they order something, I'm going to too. And I see the cart coming closer and closer and closer. And finally, she's at our row. And the person next to me orders an apple juice. Like, thank you. And I made it through. But to me, all of that was so symptomatic and symbolizing what people who choose not to drink go through all the time, from being handed that wine book to going to the really necessary happy hours after the education events, to being in the airport with all of the bars as you pass by, to then being in this locked tube where everybody around you is drinking alcohol and the smells waft up to you. And I just wonder, how can one navigate all of that, especially in those work environments, based on your experience?
Right. And so first, when what you're talking about getting sober as a person who's already a professional, that is really hard. I didn't have to face that part because that's the hardest part when you first quit and you're not really used to having new habits yet. For me, I've been to many business conferences, but they came when I was already sober for a while. So it was easier, but it still has been very uncomfortable at times. And it still sometimes is awkward and I get uncomfortable, even though I don't generally have the feeling now like I'm about to drink, but I still get this anxiety about being sort of trapped with all these other people that are drinking and seem to be like having a good time and know each other. Sometimes I have a feeling like there's a wall between them and me, like I'm different, and that can be really anxiety provoking. But so to go to one of these conferences, one of the things that so okay, so first let me say, I have my own experience, but for the work I've done in writing about sober travel, I've interviewed probably at least 50 non-drinkers of various types. So I'm also borrowing from their experience because 50 people are a lot smarter with their experience than one. So I'm going to tell you what other people have told me too from their experience. And one is that it just really helps to always have a drink in your hand. You may not, you may want to say like, I don't need to have a drink in my hand because why should everybody drink? But just holding a drink,
A
sparkling
non-alcoholic
water.
drink.
Yes, again, a non-alcoholic drink, holding some kind of drink in your hand, like a sparkling water or some kind of mocktail or Diet Coke, whatever. It's gonna preempt people from constantly asking if you want a drink because they'll just see you already have one. So that's going to cut down on part of it. And then if people notice you're not drinking alcohol, It depends on the situation you're in, because sometimes we want to share more information than others. But in a business environment where you don't want to tell our life story, I would just say no, thank you. And if they keep persisting and you feel like you want to share more, you still just, you can make some excuse. It doesn't agree with me. It doesn't make me feel good. I have an early morning tomorrow. Um, I'm just not drinking today. You could say any of those things. If someone's really pushing, then it's probably more on them. They're probably having some discomfort with their intake. But if they're really pushing and it's someone you need to be polite to, like it's someone you're trying to make some deal with or a boss or something, then you can always lie if they're really pushing you and just say something like, oh, I have a medical, I have a health reason. Well, I mean, that is true. If you have addiction, you have a health reason.
Mhm.
We all have a health reason, really, because alcohol isn't really good for anybody. You can just say it's a health reason. And I mean, you're protected by HIPAA there, right? Like they probably know they're not supposed to be pushing you too much if you say, oh, thanks so much for offering. Looks lovely, but I have a health reason. I can't drink right now. You can say something like that. I mean, you shouldn't have to. And it really galls me. And I get resentments when people push things. But if you're trying to stay professional and keep things nice and burn bridges, you can just say something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I totally agree with having that glass in your hand. Um, I remember a couple of years back, Laura and I were at a conference and we were going to an evening gala and it was offsite. So they had rented buses. So we all get out of the bus and file into this lobby. And at the door of the lobby are all the waiters and waitresses holding the trays of champagne and nothing else. And so there again, we were faced with being one of the few people who didn't have a glass in their hand. And like down there in the lobby is where the organizer came in and did this big toast. And so we're air toasting. And, people don't think. People who drink, it doesn't even cross their minds. But it can be awkward.
Mhm.
And it can feel like you're being left out or on the outside looking in. Um, and it's one of the things that we at Sober Life Rocks are super passionate about is what can we do to help people be more aware and to be more inclusive. In fact,
Well,
Laura wrote the book, The Inclusive Event Planner,
oh yeah.
specifically for this reason, for meeting planners who just don't know and don't have other ideas about what else to do. So before we move into that, I do want to now transition to leisure travel. And I
Oh,
want to just,
can I say one thing though
of
about that?
course,
And
yeah,
that's okay. So as someone who is a self-employed person in my 50s, I'm not really having I don't really have some boss or somebody. I don't really have to worry about the stigma. So in those cases, and I would encourage anyone else who's in this kind of a position too, in those cases where you're just met with all the champagne, there's this feeling of like sort of shrinking in. But I boldly step forward and say to the servers now, oh, thank you. What do you have for those of us who don't drink? And there's probably some other people there too who are going to appreciate that. But if you're in a position like I am, where you don't really have to worry so much about this stigma and you don't have to, you don't feel like you have to hide your non-drinking, I will like politely but loudly inquire and try to urge them to that direction. Maybe the next time they'll think of that too. So that's something you
I
can do if you're able to.
I love that so much. And in fact, early in the podcast, we had a gal on. Her name is Catherine Eitel Belt, who she drinks on and off. She's not like a heavy drinker. Sometimes she'll go 6 months without a drink, and then she'll have a period of time where she does. But she's a real ally of people who choose not to. And as a result of Sober Life Rocks and the building awareness, she has now started, whenever she's with a group, she'll ask the server as they walk up and hand somebody the wine list, hey, what else do you have that's non-alcoholic for any of our guests? So that it takes the onus off of the person who feels anxious about that, which I
Mhm.
think is just such a beautiful thing.
It's
And
lovely.
what it's done for me is that like you, now I'm out and proud and I ask that question. But I also, when people who meet me and appreciate what we're doing, and say, what can I do to help? That's the first thing that I suggest.
Yeah, and if you're planning an event, of course, as in the book, have some other, don't make people ask for something. Like I was one time, I was in this, it seems like a really obscure place. I was in a vintage auto museum in Fairbanks, Alaska, and they were having an event. And I would never think this would be a place that would like be, super high, highly aware about non-drinking. But in addition to their signature cocktails, they had two signature mocktails just out in big containers. And I was so impressed that they had that, because that is the nicest thing. If that's out for people, they don't even have to ask. And people who drink will try those too, and that might cut down on your costs as the host, and it also will cut down on the bad behavior of even the people that sometimes drink are only drinking half as much as they would because they want to try the mocktail too.
Absolutely. We've now heard this term of zebra drinking,
Yeah, yeah.
where people will have an alcoholic drink and then a non-alcoholic
Mhm.
drink and alternate back and forth throughout the evening. Um, but I love that you say that. And one of the things that Laura advocates in her book is, the ubiquitous little black bars at these conferences that everybody stands in line to order their drink. The music's loud, and for the person who isn't drinking to have to shout loudly, "Do you have anything without alcohol?"
Mhm.
feels very exposing. And
True.
so she recommends that these little black bars, sometimes, they'll have the bottles of beer that they have available up there, have the bottles of non-alcoholic beer as well, or have a little mocktail menu where somebody could literally just point, "I want one of those." And it's just these little subtle things that help people to feel less anxious, to know what's available, and not have to out themselves quite so publicly if they're not ready to do that. So,
True.
yeah, all great suggestions. And, I hope that we get to a place in the world where, just like with vegetarian meals, where you used to have to do the walk of shame to go pick up your cloused steamed vegetables in the corner, now it's crazy to think of a menu that doesn't have delicious vegetarian options.
Yes, I'm
I
I'm
hope we,
sober and vegan, so it's doubly I'm a double
yeah,
pain in the butt sometimes.
and I hope that we get to that point soon with non-alcoholic options. But transitioning over to leisure travel, you said earlier that people feel as though it's part of the relaxing, it's part of the reward culture. And I think that for somebody who drank and traveled, leisure travel for a lot of my life, I mean, that was part of what I looked forward to. And so I wonder, when you think about sort of the whole package of a travel experience, do you think that people who don't drink are missing out?
Well, you just have to find different things that you look forward to. And if you're used to spending a lot of time drinking on vacation, then and you want to change that behavior, then you're going to have to find new activities you enjoy instead. So this can be a real challenge. Like I was talking to, Darcy Murray at Hooked Alcohol Free Travel. She was telling me about how she didn't really know what she liked when she quit drinking, and she just tried a lot of different things. And this has been my experience too. But she talks about how she tried bird watching, and she was surprised she really enjoyed it because she would have thought it was like a really lame thing to do before. So you don't really know what you're gonna get to like. So for me, one of the things I've started to like a lot is paddling kind of sports, so kayaking and paddleboarding. So that's one of the things I always look forward to whenever I go somewhere where there's water. I try to rent a kayak or paddleboard. And that's also an activity that can be especially fun in the early morning because that tends to be a less windy time. So then that also helps get the idea that you're looking forward to something in the morning so you're not trying to stay up so late at night, because that can be a hard thing for people. It's like, well, you can do these day activities, but what do you do at night when everyone's drinking?
That's exactly what I was going to ask.
I
Because
also
I
love,
feel
if I'm
like
in a city, I love ghost tours. Those are usually at night and they're kind of fun and exciting. They don't generally involve drinking. So, or a lot of people like, theater, you could get tickets to a play that's at night and there won't really be much drinking except maybe at intermission, which, you can avoid. Yeah. You just have
mhm,
to think of different things you like to do. And you might need
mhm.
to experiment and try out some things that you haven't done before. And, some you'll like, some you won't.
Let me just challenge you a little bit on that, because all of those things are absolutely great suggestions. But when I think about travel vacations, not going to visit family, but travel, where you probably pick a lot of things to do during the day.
Mhm.
and you go on tours, or you go kayaking, or you go paddleboarding, whatever the things are. And then when you come back, you're tired and you want to relax. That to me was the time when the booze were a perfect match for that desire to relax and just unwind. Going to the theater, going to ghost tours, I mean, those sound like fun things, but they're more activities. And if I'm tired, I just want to go back to the hotel and quote, relax. So,
Mhm.
how do we handle those times?
My favorite thing to relax at night, and I'm always asking hotels for this. They don't always have them anymore, but I always ask for a room with a bathtub. Because for me, what I like to do is bring a novel and like lay in the bathtub for an hour reading a book. And for me, I have always loved reading, especially fiction. I try to read these books that make you a better person and stuff that are nonfiction. But I hardly ever get through them because I'd rather read like a murder mystery or something exciting. And I like something that it's a really different character. Maybe it's set in a different country. I get this kind of escapism because one of the things I liked about drinking so much was the oblivion of drinking and escaping myself for a while and escaping my life. So now I escape lots of times through fiction, through someone else's life. So that's what I do. Other people might want to watch, like watch a show on their computer that's popular, or talk to a friend or journal. There's things like that, and they might not sound as exciting to people who are used to drinking, but for me it's hard to beat a hot bath in a book.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that there is a social aspect to gathering around the drinks at the end of the day and comparing notes or meeting people from different countries and stuff. And I do think that similarly to those work environments, if we have ourselves fortified with what the reasons are we aren't drinking, or find a place that has a good non-alcoholic option, we can still do some of those things. What I know about me is that I enjoy those for about the first 45 minutes. And
Mhm.
then once the drinking gets heavier, then I find a reason to leave early.
And it depends on how extroverted you are too, because there's lots of people that really miss that. But me, if I've been doing activities around people all day, I am so ready to just be myself for a couple hours. I love a hotel room by myself for a couple hours. And if I stay out late with people, even without drinking, I still feel like I need that time to myself when I go back to the hotel room. So then I end up staying up way too late because I just need some time by myself. And I know that's my personality. It's not everybody's. But sometimes if I'm with a group and they're staying out late, and even if they're not drinking alcohol and they're still talking, I'm thinking, oh my God, we've been together all day. How can they still find stuff to talk about? I'm just really ready for some quiet and some alone time. So
Your
it's gonna
social battery is totally untapped. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just going to depend on your personality type. And maybe if you're new to not drinking, you're not really sure what that is because you've always been one way. So I'd say just give yourself some space to find out. You might want time alone in the bath, like I do, or you might want to find a way to engage with people in a low key way without drinking. You just have to figure out what's going to make you happiest.
Yeah. So let's take this to the other extreme. Um, what are some of the things that you think people who do drink might miss out on that those of us who don't drink get to enjoy?
Remembering what happened last night, consciously choosing who you're going to have sex with. I mean, there's a lot of things
Yes.
you miss out on if you're drunk all the time. But you might not be talking about people that are that drunk. But if you're say you're not quite that drunk, but you're still drinking some, you might have a fuzzy head, you might have a headache. You might just not feel like getting out in the morning, so you might miss out on things like the sunrise, the early morning bird watching and kayaking. Um, the making deeper connections maybe to people, because sometimes the connections, it's when you get together drinking, it usually starts out, that first drink or two really brings people together and they're all sort of hyped up because they sort of get stimulated a little bit. But then as the drink gets on and it gets kind of sloppy and a more depressant effect, it's not such a close connection. So you might feel at first like you're really making this connection, but I feel like my deeper connections are now, with people that I have a good conversation with, and neither of us is drinking.
Absolutely. I remember at another work event, but it was with a group of women that I know fairly well. And my social battery was running low. the drinking volume was going up, and I wasn't ready to leave because I felt like it was an important place for me to be. So I was sort of in that like do I don't I place, and so I kind of stepped out of the fray for a bit. And another gal who drinks rarely came over, and she's like, you and I haven't caught up for a long time. Let's go find some chairs in a quiet place. And we did. And you could kind of see the big crowd, but we sat and chatted for a while. And then another woman came over, and she's like, "Do you mind if I join you? This is just so loud." And so she sat down and we had an amazing conversation. And then two more women came over, and pretty soon we had a group of like 8 or 9 women who were all in little clusters having these amazing conversations because, and I don't even know who was the drinker, who wasn't, but just sometimes that whole scene gets to be too much, and the quality connections are what we're all really longing for.
And you were the first people to step out and give the other people permission to find a quieter nook too, because sometimes people feel like they can't do that. So sometimes if you're able to be the leader in making another
Mhm.
choice, it's going to help other people too.
And so I think the same could be said about leisure travel. That evening when you get back and you're tired, but you still want to like unwind with people. It doesn't have to be in the whole large group. You could find one or two people who you wanted to connect with better and just set up that quiet little corner and just enjoy that companionship without it being the big crowd at the bar.
Mhm. And I'm
Yeah,
always looking to get outside at these things, like at big conferences and stuff. So I like to maybe ask somebody, "Hey, do you want to just go on a little walk?" It doesn't have to be like a giant exercise thing, but just go get a little air. And I even did that at Amplify. I got out for a little walk with one friend or another a couple times, and you get a bit of one-on-one kind of time and a little air and a little perspective.
absolutely, absolutely. So, Teresa, one of the things that I love to highlight on this podcast is the journey that people took to being so public about their alcohol-free choices. And as you said, you started this journey back in your 20s, but when did you kind of start the process of being more public about it, of writing about sober travel? And what led you to that decision?
Yeah, that really has been a shift. So I was never super private. Like if it seemed relevant, I would mention it. So there were times when like when I was in graduate school quite a while ago, people knew I didn't drink because there'd be events and I just say, no, I don't drink. I didn't make a big deal out of it, but it was public enough that people would sometimes come to me later one on one and be like, I think I have a problem, or I think my sister has a problem. So I could be of service that way. And that was really nice, but it wasn't something I ever led with. So when I first started writing about sober travel, my first article was, I think it was in 2017. And I'd gone on a press trip to Healdsburg in California in the wine country. And I was with a group of other travel writers, and I told the PR people organizing it that I didn't drink, and they let me do some alternative activities while other people went to wine tastings. And I found lots of fun things to do. So I pitched it to an editor of the story about like, what to do, 10 things you can do in Healdsburg if you don't drink, because that's a place that's really known for wine. And it did well on the website. And the editor said, hey, you could write some more like this. There seems to be an interest. So that made me kind of think, oh, there's people that are interested in this. So I kind of fooled around with those and wrote a few more articles here and there about sober travel in the next few years, just like that kind of seeing a place through a sober lens.
Mhm.
And then about 4 years ago, I started to get this urge to write a book about it, but I wasn't really sure if there was enough interest in it for a publisher to want to take it on, and if there was really enough material to make a book. But I shopped it around and I found a publisher, Microcosm Publishing in Portland, and they first said they'd take a chance and publish it as a zine, like a 90s style with a staple. And they did in 2023. And it did well enough that they brought it out this year as a full length book with an actual spine, which I love. But in that,
Yeah, it's a beautiful
oh, thank
book.
you. Oh, look, there it is. Thank you.
Yeah.
But in that process, though, I had to start telling people that's what I was writing about, right? So it was a really weird shift to start telling people, instead of it just coming up naturally. Like when I met somebody at a travel industry event, I'd go up and I'd say, hey, I'm Teresa Bergen, and I write about outdoorsy and eco and sober travel. I would just throw it in there. And I started to throw it in like it was an actual thing, even though people hadn't really heard of that yet or thought it was anything. But I kind of thought, well, if I act like it is, then they won't want it to, they'll kind of feel like, oh, they're not in the know. They need to find out about it. But I had to really, I had even a physical feeling of being like kind of scared about it and feeling like I was shrinking. So I'd have to like really lift up my chest and have my posture and say, I write about sober travel. And then just period, not, start explaining. And then if they asked me, then I would tell them more about it. And
what was the reactions like?
Well, one of the first people I said it to, and this was really cool, this guy, Ernest White the second, I think he's a second, not a third. He has a PBS show, a travel show, and he travels all around the world. And he was a keynote speaker, and he was talking about what was he talking about? I think he was talking about being gay and traveling. It was a niche. He had he did a lot of different stuff, but that was part of his lens. And so I thought, well, that's kind of like me. I'm doing this lens of sober. So afterwards I went up and I said, I write about sober travel. And he said, well, I'm a sober traveler too. And I went, really? And then talking to him more, it turned out he wasn't in recovery like me. He's just someone who doesn't like alcohol and doesn't drink and is constantly being offered drinks and has to deal with it like I do, but without the high stakes because he's not worried about relapse, right? So this was like a mind-blowing experience for me, meeting someone who identified as a sober traveler who didn't ever have a problem. And it really expanded my understanding of the different kinds of drinkers because I was kind of in my little box of like, oh, people who feel like this are in recovery. I didn't even know about like gray area drinkers. And then I started meeting all these people who don't drink for medical reasons or mental health reasons,
religious,
drug interactions, Yeah, there's a ton of them. So by me being willing to lead with that, I met so many people. And I also, it also helped me diminish some of my resentments because I kind of felt, even after all this time, I had this little bit of me that was kind of put upon, poor me, I'm missing out because I'm in recovery. And then I met all these other people and I'm like, oh, there's lots of people who don't. And they're not all looking at me thinking about why they don't really care and they don't drink and I can hang out with them if I want to be around people who don't drink. It was really a bit liberating and it has made me, I think, a more slightly more open-minded, better person.
I hear this again and again and again that we enter this chapter of sharing, sometimes at first slowly, sometimes all at once, about our choices. And more often than not, people have some trepidation, rightly so, even in today's society. And almost to a T, the reaction that we get is being embraced, being uplifted, finding others who are like us than we thought, and becoming part of something important, something that matters. And I'm just so excited to hear that you too kind of had that experience of all of a sudden it was like you were embraced for your journey and found other people in that same vein. So now that the book is out, tell me a little bit about that. And I mean, I loved sort of scrolling through it. One of the things that I particularly liked was that you go through all of these different scenarios. You go through, what do you do at a wedding? What do you do if you're in another country? What do you do if you're, in these various different situations, along with some really cool suggestions about places to go, fun little, out of the way places that you might not otherwise find. But what has been the reaction? And tell me more.
When I was first conceptualizing the book, I had a lot of trouble figuring out if it was going to sit on like a mental health shelf or a travel shelf. And I really went back and forth and I kind of wrote different proposals and compared with different books. And then I was in some airport somewhere and I came across this Lonely Planet book that was the Digital Nomad Handbook. And I realized I wanted it to be something like that. I wanted it to be clearly a travel book, but aimed at a population looking through a certain lens. So then I started to look for more books like that. And I found, like there's books for wheelchair users and books for, I found one that was like, Black girls travel. It was, things that Black women would specifically face on the road. There was one called, I think it was called like Young, Sexy, and Broke. That wasn't me, but it was like for people who are young, sexy, and broke who want to travel. So I thought, okay, I want to do it in that spirit. So I tried to make it like a, fun, bright, easy to read kind of book that was full of useful information. So either from my experience or from people I interviewed. And I tried to interview people a lot of people who were different from me. I tried to find people of different religions who didn't drink for religious reasons, and people of different sexual orientations and different races, and tried to find out wherever I could, what are some things you face that I might not know about with your, traveling sober, and what tips can you share? So I tried to make it as useful as I could from a lot of perspectives, not just my perspective. So hopefully it is.
And where can people find this book?
Well, you can get it from my publisher, but it's probably easiest just to go to my website and click from there. But I'm at teresabergen.com, TeresaBergen.
And we'll put that in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
I definitely recommend this for anybody who, this is new, or you want some new ideas. I mean, I looked through it and I was like, a lot of the stuff is stuff that I've experienced or done, but some of the things in here I was like, oh, that's cool. I hadn't thought of that before. So thank you for writing that.
Thanks. Yeah, that was my experience when I was researching it, because I thought, oh, I've been a sober travel writer for ages. I know all this stuff. And then people would give me these insights. I'd be like, wow, I never thought of that. I'll put that in there too.
Yeah. So as we kind of wind this up, if there's somebody who's listening who loves to travel, but is worried that it won't feel the same without alcohol, what would you want them to know?
Be gentle with yourself. It won't feel the same. It'll feel different. But once you start doing it and find out how to navigate the world without alcohol and concentrate on the things that you really like to do, it'll be more fulfilling. But also especially if you're in recovery, so, so by recovery, I mean someone who feels more threatened by relapse, right? Because if you're just someone who doesn't drink or who's quit drinking, but you're not going to be adversely affected if you drink again, you know what I mean? Like you might feel a little bad, like, oh, I messed up, but you're not going to feel like, oh, screw, I'm really screwed because I threw away my 3 years of sobriety or whatever. But if you're someone who's really in recovery like that, then just don't rush yourself either. I was talking to someone recently who was telling me how she wants to travel, but she's only 105 days sober. And I said, that's great, but don't rush it, and build your support system at home first. So you have, you feel solid, and then you'll be able to call on that when you're on the road. You'll have people to check in with. So I'd say take your time, be gentle with yourself, and just try to go slowly and find out more about your sober traveling self.
I remember vividly hearing a woman in recovery talk about how she went on a cruise with her family that had been long planned, like a month into her sobriety. And she said it was the hardest thing she's ever done. She spent time in her stateroom just crying because it was so uncomfortable and there was nowhere else to go. And she was surrounded by people who were drinking. And she said, on the one hand, I wish that I hadn't had that time. Now, though, having made it through to the other side, she was like, I'm glad that I had that because it really like strengthened my resolve. But I wouldn't wish that on anybody. So, yeah, words of the wise: pick your timing and your location carefully as you sort of emerge into this world.
Yeah, travel is expensive. You don't want to go on the cruise and stay in your stateroom. You want to make the most of your money and your opportunities.
That's right. That's right. So, just kind of reflecting on what we've talked about, I want to leave you all a couple of thoughts from this conversation with Teresa. I think travel is one of the places where alcohol kind of becomes the norm, starting at the airport and starting with, the celebratory openings to arrival. Um, throughout the restaurants, throughout all of the different places that we go. It's almost presented as part of the experience. But this conversation with Teresa reminded me today that when you take alcohol out of the equation, something interesting can happen. You can start to notice things differently. The early mornings, those quiet conversations, the places that you might have skipped because they weren't built around nightlife. And maybe the bigger takeaway is this: so many of the things that we think we need alcohol for, relaxing, connecting, celebrating, are actually things we can experience more fully when we're present for them. So if you love to travel or if you're planning a trip soon, it might be worth asking yourself a simple question. What would this experience look like if alcohol wasn't the center of it? Not as a rule, not as a restriction, but as an experiment. Because as Teresa's story shows, sometimes when we remove one familiar part of the experience, we can discover a whole new way to enjoy it. Teresa, thank you so much for spending the time with me today and really kind of bringing to light this different lens that we can look through.
Thanks for having me on the show, and thanks for being sober out loud with me.
Absolutely. And if this conversation resonated with you, please make sure that you subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Each week on the Sober Life Rocks podcast, we talk with people who stepped away from alcohol and discovered that choice can lead to unexpected new directions. And if you know someone who loves to travel and might be curious about experiencing alcohol free, send them this episode, because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply to let someone else see what's possible. Until next time, thank you.